Welcome back to another episode of my Python tutorial series. My name is Eliaza and you are watching EA Lego Academy. Now to take us further in our tutorial series, in our last class we looked at a couple of widgets, we looked at the tree view, we looked at the top level widget, we looked at a couple of other widgets. So looked at the frame, looked at the scale, we looked at the tree view, we looked at the top level. So we said the frame is a widget that allows us to create a background for us to place widget on. We said that the scale widget is a widget that allows us to create either a vertical or horizontal rectangular bar, which allows us to choose from some range or a range of values. And then we looked at the tree view and we said the tree view widget is like a table that allows us to display data in rows and columns. And we looked at the top level, which is a window screen generated from another window screen, whereby its closure is dependent on the window screen it was generated from. Now, to take us further in our tutorial, we're going to look at how we can create some widgets that allow us to open up our file explorer. So it allows us to create a file dialog, such as when I'm trying to save a file or when I'm trying to read from a file. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to use a class called file dialog, which allows us to be able to access widgets. So it's actually a sub-module, not a class. So it's a sub-module in the tkinter library or module. It allows us to be able to access our file explorer to create files, to save files rather, and read from files that are already in existence and have text in them. And also, so we'll look at the file dialog module, and then so there's a modus operandi, like I said, which I normally follow. We'll look at that, and then we'll look at the message box widget, and then we'll look at the paned window widget. So these are the widgets we're going to look at today: the file dialog, the message box, and then the paned window. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, you want to come here. So I'm assuming you have PyCharm already installed on your system. I'm assuming you. So this is not the first tutorial video. So it's assumed that you have been following all my past tutorial videos. So go back to my tutorial series and check for the videos that will allow you to set up your PyCharm integrated development environment. So I'll come here, I will right click on new Python file. So very first thing I'm looking at is file access. So I'll just call it file access, or let's say file dialog project. It's a sub module gotten from the tkinter. Now, the first thing I want to do is to import tkinter. To import tkinter, then you come here, you say from tkinter import file dialog. That's it. Now, I'm going to create two buttons whereby, or rather, I'll create a text widget such that when I click on a button, it allows me to write the content from that text widget to a file and save it on my system. And when I click on open file, it's going to allow me to be able to navigate to a file on my system, retrieve data from that file, and then display it on the text widget. So that is what I'm trying to do. So the first thing I will do is just a basic text editor. So I'll say basic, or I'll just say so I'll create the window screen. That's the first thing you want to do. You say tkinter.tk, and then come here, you say window.title. I will call it basic text editor, and after that I will give it some geometry. The geometry, I will give it 500 by 600, make it big. Now come here and say text is equal to tkinter dot text. Now give it some. So I'll specify that I'm displaying it on my window screen. And I'll come here and I'll give it some font. I'll give it Arial 30. And I'll come here and I'll give it a width, how wide it's going to be. I'll say 20. I'll give it some height. I'll say 10. After that, I'll come here and say text.pack so that I can display it there. Now, after that, I am going to create some functions that allow me to be able to read from a file and display it on my text widget, or it's going to allow me to be able to write data from my text widget to a file. So I'll call it save. That will be the name of the first function. And after that, I'll come here and say filedialog dot ask save as file name. So this is a class inside the filedialog module that allows us to be able to save a file as a particular type. Now, just similar to your file explorer, when you open your file explorer, specifically when you look at notepad and you write some text and you want to save it, you will discover that a file dialog will pop up that allows you to choose the extension of the file you are trying to save in. So in order to do that, I'll come here and say file types. Now, file types will be a list of tuples holding the different file types you can save. Now, the very first file I want to save is text files. Text files, and you come here, open another single quote beside it, use an asterisk, and you say .txt. This allows you to ensure that you are saving your file as a text file. Now, the next one I want to save is Python file. Python files. Come here, you put your asterisk, you say .py, and then the next one is all file types. I'll say all files. I'll come here and I'll say asterisk dot asterisk. I'm sure you can still remember what asterisk means after this asterisk. So this dot, the name, is specifying the extension. So this means I'm trying to save Python files. This means I'm trying to save text files. And then this asterisk means I'm trying to save every single file type there is. And after that, you want to give it a default extension. You want to put a default extension. Default extension means that the default file it will default to for you to save as. I'll come here and say default extension, and I will just say .txt. So I'm going to make it to default to save as a text file. After that, I want to create a conditional statement, but before that, I'll create a variable. I'll just say file is equal to file. I'll now come here and say if file. So that means if I'm opening up that file, I want to use my with open command. I will say with open, so it's open file, and after that I will use my, so I'm trying to write to the file, say as fx, and after that we want to now, so this my text, so I'm trying to save a file. I'm trying to save a file, and basically I'll come here and I will try to write it to that file. So I'm assuming that I've already opened that file and I'm trying to write something to it. I'm going to say fx.write. Fx.write. Now I want to retrieve data from my text widget. So I'll first of all convert it to a string of the string class, and I'll come here and say text.get. Then I'll say 1.0. So 1.0 simply means that I'm starting from the very first line and I'm going to the very last line in my entry widget. Starting from the very first line and then going to the very last line. That's what it means. So that's what this code is going to do for us. Then after that, you want to print out something to your screen that what you did was actually successful. So I'll come here and say print success saving to file. After that, after you have written to the file, you want to also clear the entry widget. So I'll come here and say text dot delete. So obviously I'm starting from 1.0 because it's at this 1.0 we're doing it this way because it's multiple lines of text. So I'll come here and say tkinter dot end so that it can clear that my text widget as well. Then I'm going to create another function that allows me to be able to read from the file. So I'll just call it access so that it will not clash with the already existing function. So I'll come here and say access and I'll say file is equal to file dialog dot ask open file name, ask open file name. Then the same thing, I'm not going to waste my time. I'll just come here, copy the file types up to this point down to the default extension. I'll copy it and I'll paste it. So after that, I will also do the same thing. If I'm opening the file, if file, of course, we know that this has to return true. So it's going to return true if I am selecting a file. So it will only return true if I have selected a file of these types. Also the same thing too, it will return true if I've selected a file of these types. Now I'll come here and say with open. So you can go back to my previous tutorial when I talked about how you can use this with open command. So it allows us to write to a file. If I'm using W, I'm trying to write to that particular file. So I'll come here and I'll say file. So this time around, I'm trying to read the file. And I'll say as fx. So I'll just create some variable. I'll just call it data is equal to fx dot read. Now I'll assign it there. Then I'll come here and I'll now call my text dot set. So I'll just come here and call my text dot set. Just a minute. Alright, so my bad, I actually forgot, so I have to go and check it out. Everybody forgets, obviously. So I'll come here and I'll say text dot insert. And so insert is the function similar to when we talked about inserting into a list. So if you can still remember, so it treats this my text widget as a list because it has multiple lines of text. So I'll come here and say tkinter dot end. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm not trying to specify the exact index. End allows us to catch all the indexes on that my text widget. So multiple lines of text. And you now come here and then you pass the data that you are trying to insert into that widget. All right, so if I've loaded from a file, it's going to display everything for me. So I'll just come here and create buttons. I'll say click 1 is equal to tkinter dot button. Now I'll come here and say window. So I'm trying to display it on the window screen. So equal to save. That's what I'll save it because I want to pass it to this button. I'll come here, say rl 30, and I'll say command. So you can use lambda. I already explained this lambda. Now come here and say save. So you can decide to say click one dot pack. I want to just pack them on top of themselves. I'm not bothering myself with aesthetics at all. Just want to get straight to the point so that I can be over with this tutorial. Again, I'm doing it at the last minute before I close from work. So that's why I have to be fast. I'll come here and say access. Okay, and then after that, I'll say window dot main loop. All right, so let's run the code and see what we have. Okay, so I have this. Okay, so I'll have to change the text so that it can make sense. I'll come here to save. This one is read or load. Anyone load, run the code. So if I click on load, it opens up my file dialog for me to choose the file I'm trying to load from. So let me do that again. So maybe I'm trying to load from a particular file. Why is this thing doing like this? Okay, there's a problem somewhere. I don't know why this guy is not. Alright, let me close it again and run it again. So it's increased the screen and just alright, let's just forget about that. Now next class we'll look at that, but let me try to load a particular file from my window screen to display the text. So you can see that this was what I wrote on that text, and I can be able to scroll through the content of that file. I can be able to scroll through the content rather of that file. So I can click on save to save it in another file, and I'll just come here and give it a name. I'll just call it new. So first of all, let's look at the extensions. So if I click on the drop down, you'll see that these were the extensions I listed in my code: text file, Python file, all files. If you go back to the code, you will discover that that was what I listed. So I still my time. All right. So if you minimize, you will see that these were all the content: text file, Python file, all file types. So let's try and save it somewhere else. I'll just call it new data, and I'll save it to my desktop. Click on. So the default is text file. So let's see if it's going to really appear on. And immediately I saved it, you can see that it clears from the screen, which is what I did. That was that command I did here. So delete. So let's check if new data is on my desktop. So look through the information. It was not here before initially. It wasn't here. So I have to look for it. New data. Hey, where could it be? So you can see it here, new data, and initially this was the text I opened from was exhibit, I think, and this was where I now moved it to. You can see that it has created a new file called new data, and it has written all the text there. So that's basically how you can use your file save, your ask open file name, and your ask save as file name. So that is exactly how you can use them. Now, the next thing we want to look at is, so we want to look at our message box widget. So before I proceed to the message box widget, I will just show you an example of how it will look like. Now, let's take for instance, if I'm trying to be able to load data, if I'm trying to look for a file that is not in existence, I'm going to have a pop-up on our window screen. So maybe I try to look for a part of a file that is not in existence. So I say entry. Now you see I get a pop-up dialog. This is a message box. It's a message box. So we have different types of message boxes that show us different pop-ups. So what I'll do to save myself the stress, I'm going to do a lot of copying and pasting so that we can be very fast and scale our time. So I'll just say message box widget. So I'll just come here and say import tkinter as the first thing. I'll come here and say from tkinter import message box. After that, now in order to do that error message that we just saw, I will create a function called error, and I'll just come here and say message box dot show error. So the function to show error is called show error. So to show that circular icon with the X in the middle, it's show error we're going to use. So I'll just come here and say error. Now display some message called error message. So this will be the title and this will be the error. You can see that PyCharm already does that for us, giving us the title and then the message. So I'll just copy that, save myself this. There's no need to copy it in the first place. I'll just come here and create another function and call it message, or rather info. That's the name of the next function, info. I'll come here and say message box dot show info, and I'll just come here and say info. I'll just say info message. Do the same thing as well for the next function. I'll call it warning message box dot show warning message. In the next one, it's going to be ask question, I suppose. Ask question, say message box dot ask question. Just come here and say question. You see question. Now some of them have okay, some of them have yes and no. So this ask question has a yes and no button at the bottom, and then for its icon it has a question mark. This one has an exclamation mark in a triangle. This one has an icon in a circle. This one has an X icon in a circle. And the next one is retry cancel, I suppose. Try cancel. Come here, you say message box retry. Sorry, ask retry cancel. My mistake. So ask retry cancel. I'll just come here and say message box ask retry cancel. I'll just say retry cancel. Now come here and say retry cancel message. Okay. Then the next thing I want to create is my ask yes no function. So I'll say ask yes no. I'll come here. I'll say message box dot ask yes no. So I'll come here, say yes no, then ask yes no. So I'll just create buttons. The first one will be error no. Just call it err is equal to tkinter dot button, and it's going to be on the window screen. So I've not created a window screen, my bad. So I'll come here and say window. So window is equal to tkinter dot tk. You come down here and say window dot title, and you just say message box widget. And after that, you come here and say window dot geometry. And I'll give it 300 by 400. I'll make it bigger than that. I'll say 400 by 600. I'll say window text. I'll say what's it called? Error. So error, I can give it a font. say area 30. Now pass the command. So you can use lambda, but I'm just going to use the function, the command without the lambda. So I'll just say error. Now remove the parentheses. So I'll pack that, say err dot pack, so that it can be displayed. Now to save myself the stress, I will just copy this function a couple of times. Sorry, this button a couple of times, and I will pass the different respective functions to its copy. I'll change the name. So error, next one is info, next one is warning. So warning. The next one is ask question. Next one is ask retry cancel. Next one is ask yes no. And the last one is ask okay cancel. So ask retry cancel, ask yes no, ask yes no. So I did not actually create for the ask okay cancel. So I'll quickly do that. We have one more dialog box. So ask okay cancel. So forgot that. Message dot ask okay cancel. I'll just say okay slash cancel. They come here, say okay cancel message. This one you come here, you add message. And after that, you want to pass them to the various buttons. So ask yes, no, ask okay, cancel. Okay. So after that, you want to call your main loop, say window dot main loop. You want to run your code. Let's see what we have. No, actually, sorry, they all have the same name. So you want to change their names. My bad. So now for the first one, we have error, correct. The next one we have info. Say info. The next one you have warning. You say warning. The next one you have ask question. Say ask question. The next one you have ask retry cancel. Say ask retry cancel. The next one you have ask yes no. Say ask yes no. The next one you have ask okay cancel. Say ask okay cancel. So let's run the code and see what's up. Now we have all the buttons. So I click on this one, I get my error, and the width of the message box will only be as wide as the length of the message. Click OK. If I click in that message, I click on one, I have one message. I click on ask question, tell me question message. You have to click on either yes or no before it can be removed from your screen. Click on ask cancel. Click on ask yes no. Click on no. Anything you click on, provided you are interacting, even if you click on cancel, it will do the same thing too. All right, so that's all for message box widget. We are going to attach. We are going to update our banking system with this, so that in case you are entering a wrong name or a wrong ID or a wrong password, it will trigger and tell you and display a message for you. So we're going to upgrade our banking system with the new things we have learned. So the first thing we learned was the tree view in the previous tutorial. The next thing we have learned right now is the message box, which we are going to use to update the project. Now the next thing we want to look at is a paned window. Paned window. So paned window is a type of window that allows us to display our widgets in a particular orientation or using a particular orientation. So you can either choose to display your widgets vertically, or you can choose to display them horizontally. So I'll just come here and say paned project, the paint project, and you want to import tkinter, you come here and say window, create your window screen, you go to tkinter.tk, you come here, and you say window.title, just a pained widget. And after that, you can come here and give it some geometry. So I'll give it 300 by 400. Now I'll come down here and I can create a button. I'll say btn tkinter dot. So I want to create 3 buttons in a horizontal manner. Before I do that, I'll come here and I'll say pane is equal to tkinter dot paned window. So the paned window, you open a parenthesis. I'm saying on the window screen, I'm going to give it an orient of horizontal. So I want to display them horizontally in horizontal fashion. So I'm not going to pack it yet. I'll just come here and say that my button is on the pane window. I'll say text, say B, I'll say button 1. I'll give it some font. I'll say Arial 30. So Arial is the type of font, 30 is the size. I'll come here and say btn.pack, and I'll say fill equal to tkinter.put. I'll say expand equal to tkinter.yes. So after that, I'll just come here and change it to button 1. And I'll just copy it to degree. I'll copy it and then I'll paste it a couple of times. So 1, 2. So I'll come here and say button 2, button 3. Now, as I add it and I pack it to the window screen, I have to come here and say pane.add. So there's a function called add that allows us to add a widget to a pane window. So after that, I'll just copy it 2 more times, paste it, change it to button 2, and then paste it again and change it to button 3. And after that, I will now pack my pane window. Say pane.pack. So I'll just copy this point from this field, both tkinter.ts, copy it, and then paste it in the parentheses of my pack. My mistake there. Copy it and then come here and then paste it, Ctrl V. So after that, so what I'm simply trying to say is that as I expand the paned window, the buttons expand with it. Now, one thing you should know is that as you are expanding your paned window, it will be the last button at the right hand side that will be expanding. It doesn't mean you cannot expand the other buttons. But what this simply means is that as you're expanding the paned window, it will be the last button at the right hand side that will be expanding. So let's see how we can do that. So I'll come here and say window.main loop, and I'll try to execute the program. Now okay, let me change the size first of the window screen so that it will be wider. I'll just say 600. I'll leave it at 400 so that you see everything. So you can see all my buttons. So as I expand the window screen, it will be the last button that will be expanding. It doesn't mean I can't also come here and expand this button, or come here and expand this one too. So you can also expand them. It's just that as you're expanding this window screen, it will be the last one that will be expanding. So you can also decide to change the orientation to vertical. You can decide to add any widget to this paned window screen. It's not only buttons you can add. You can also add a label. You can come here and change it to label, and I'll just say hello. So you will see that we're going to have a label widget there, yellow there, and they'll be stacked vertically in a vertical manner. So you can see that at the top, I have a label widget. So it just allows us to display widgets in a particular orientation. That's what it does. That's what it does. All right, so that brings us to the so you can also use it as a way to display buttons as well. So I didn't even mention that. So you can decide to play around with your banking system and you can adjust instead of using a frame as a background, you can use your pane as a background to hold those widgets. So something you can experiment with just by yourself to get more proficient. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's tutorial. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. If you feel like my content will be of importance to someone else, your friends, your families, people you communicate with, please share. And if you want to encourage me to create more content like this, please hit that subscribe button. So till we meet again next time, goodbye for now.